Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's professional development session on explicit teaching. Something quite different to what we would normally do with this recording, but I thought it was a really good idea in terms of people who might be away on the day, who have another commitment, and also those who have just joined us, or are newer to the school and earlier in the journey in terms of explicit teaching might find it more beneficial to be able to look back on documents more closely. And again, just a way of learning something from our COVID situation, I guess, using technology better to um, go through meetings and professional development. So not necessarily something to always do in the future, but I thought it was a good idea for this afternoon. So I'll really get on with it then. Um, so in terms of this afternoon, really just want to go through some housekeeping matters with what's happening recently with tracking tests. So a lot of that's been happening last week and today and this week. Just a general reminder, if you have any students who have been absent, if you could just follow them up when they return to school, and that data will go home to parents, aiming for the end of this week. So if you do have students that you need to catch up, or if you need any assistance with catching them up, please let me know, and I'm happy to come in and help supervise if needed. Um, Past data, again, the purpose of that tracking test is really just to help us inform what we're doing in terms of our teaching, what sort of things should be putting in our consolidation warm-ups, and also letting our parents know how the boys are going in lead up to summative tests in weeks 5 and so forth. Today's professional development, and I do want to keep it really focused on moving forward with explicit teaching. So there's really some things we've spoken about before, but I think we can look at them again because we haven't had a meeting in such a long time. It's really about this idea of developing purposeful learning intentions and success criteria into our lessons on an ongoing basis in every lesson, and trying to get a really strong alignment in within each subject, um, across the classes within each cohort, but also at a larger systemic level in terms of boys in year 9 maths, or whether it's year 7 literacy, are receiving a common language across the subject areas, because that's obviously going to be really, really important for us. So yes, the focus is about reviewing and creating LI, learning intentions and success criteria, to be used in these subjects. Um, you've seen this many times before, particularly just as a refresher or for those who are new to IGS or new to the process this year. That's our curriculum delivery for explicit teaching. And the warm up is something that's been working really, really well. I've been super impressed with what I've seen in teams lately in terms of the different types of warm up resources that are being made across the different subjects, and things like differentiation. Really, really, really superb. So, excellent work on that. And that's something that is obviously bread and butter to explicit teaching. There's not too much more we can talk about it in terms of that becoming better. That comes better through practice, and it comes better through feedback from practice. So I don't want to focus too much more on the warm up in professional development sessions in these afternoon sessions, but certainly if you would like to see more information on that, you can go into Teams professional development, and there's some video files there. So yes, learning intention, success criteria. What are we learning today? Common language within EQ, and what am I looking for? So I wanted to unpack this a little bit further because, as I said earlier, we have discussed this a lot in the past, but in terms of actually thinking about what the research says and some of the things that John Fleming, our consultant, will emphasize in terms of the difference between what he might expect in the success criteria as opposed to what some of the research says about what success criteria looks like. Is success criteria a rephrasing of the learning intention in a manner that is perhaps just a little bit more practical, Or is it something that's actually outlining specific steps or specific characteristics that make the intention successful? Are they the steps or are they the characteristics that determine whether this is going to be an A level or a B level or a C standard, etc.? So that's what I wanted to really zoom in on today. Why are we doing this? Well, we obviously want to tell boys, I do, we do, you do, our gradual release model, and so forth. Lesson review, consolidating, reflecting back on these intentions, were we successful? Obviously, this links to our eights or standards. In terms of planning and implementing teaching and learning, we want to make sure that we're setting goals every lesson that are purposeful, challenging, um, and we're all at different stages with this in terms of applying this language within lessons in our explicit teaching framework. So that's something else I want to talk about too, because I think it's not something that's just going to happen overnight. It's something that we develop as a group, as a team, collaboratively within subjects, and it's something we practice and we reflect on as we're going in terms of what is actually working well within in the classes, and at the end of the day, what's making the learning as clear as possible. There's some handouts. I have printed them off for you. I'm not going to read through all of that, but this is again just eight all talking about what are learning intentions, what are success criteria, why they're important, some practical elements to them, rubrics, work samples, bump up walls, etc. So that's something, a resource that you can look at. I've shown this diagram a lot because I think it's just really important because it really derives from uh, visible learning with John Hattie, who I want to look at in a moment in terms of what he has to say about learning intentions and success criteria. But we can see it's really in terms of the things that make the biggest difference to student outcomes. Obviously, we're critical practitioners. We're looking at data, but we're using goals, we're using intentions to structure our good lessons. We've got good routines. We're explicitly teaching and giving feedback. To give feedback, we need obviously clear goals and what we're doing and what makes learning look and be successful. So obviously, there's a reason why this is number one and why I really wanted us to take another look at this in terms of reflection, metacognition, reflecting on those goals. Multiple exposures, that's our warm-ups, our consolidation warm-ups. Worked examples, again, coming back into, well, what does success look like? Are we explicitly teaching the task in all of its refined, smaller elements? So here's just a John Hattie on learning intention success criteria. I think it's really important. He says some really great things about why we should be doing it.
The operative word in that sentence you asked me was and. Learning intentions without success criteria, hopeless. Success criteria without having learning intentions is not as bad, not very good. One of the things that I like Shirley Clark from England's work in this area particularly is how you can construct those success criteria in terms of what students are supposed to learn, not what they're supposed to do. And one of the mistakes I see is so often you have a learning intention about what we're doing today. It's just not interesting. It's not about the task. Like, I go back to the examples I was using before. The best way of showing students what success criteria is to show them what an A looks like before they start. Show them what a B looks like. Show them what the end of the product looks like. Now, a lot of teachers I work with struggle with that because they think that what success looks like is what you achieve when you get to the end. And obviously in our time-constrained world, the end means the end of a series of lessons. And we don't value efficiency. What would happen if the kids learned it earlier? Well, that's a bit of a problem for us in many ways. We have to adjust that time frame. I went to a school this morning and I saw the second part of what I wanted to say on this is I saw the students putting up success criteria before they started. They were doing this science work and they were starting with what would success look like. Now, they struggled to know what that was. They needed a lot of help. That's why the teacher's there. But teaching the kids up front, what it looks like when they get there. How do I know when they get? Like I go back to my sports analogy. If I said to you, I'm going to teach you what Australian rules football looks like, but I'm not going to tell you what the rules are, and I'm not going to tell you how to score, but I want you to go out there and play it. For many of you, you'd give up very quickly, particularly in a game like Australian rules. It just looks random. Unfortunately, for a lot of kids in our school, that's what learning looks like. So all I have to do is wait, and I'll either be guided or I'll be told off. What I want to do up front is show them what that success looks like. Like I go back to that example before. I'm a kid, I'm struggling in maths. Please give me the answer, and then I'll worry about the strategy. Show me what that success looks like. Now, I want both. I want them to get the right answer, but sometimes I have to show them successful learning in this way, and now I want you to concentrate and use your efficiency in terms of the strategies. Now, the other part of that is that if you, teacher, before you start, have a clear understanding of what success looks like, you're more likely to get rid of the stuff that doesn't matter. You're more likely to acknowledge and understand what it looks like. And you are, and here's the critical one, you're more likely to tell the kids up front. Like when I went back before and talked about what a visible learning school looks like, it's when kids know what success looks like before they start. Like a lot of kids will give up, or they'll do what they have to do until the bell goes. That is not what you call lifelong learning. That's not what I think our schools are about. For some students, they will do what you ask them to do, regardless of whether it's the beginning or the end. Great. But what about those other kids? It's only if it's showing up near the front. Now, the front doesn't mean the very first day. Sometimes on the first day you want to understand what the kids know and don't know before you decide what success looks like. Like as Graham Nuttall, he spent years of his life putting microphones on kids every morning of the year, every afternoon he went home and listened to them. And one of his findings, 60% of what's taught in every lesson the kids know already. So it's a very important phase at the beginning to understand what kids don't know. But very soon after that, I just don't think there is any excuse for not exposing to the students what success looks like in this lesson. You might want to then argue that it's cheating, that they get to know. Is it really such a problem that they learn what the end of the task looks like up the front? Now, what you're going to have to do as a teacher is you're going to have to be more creative about thinking different ways for understanding whether the kids truly have got it or if they're parroting. And that requires a different set of teaching strategies, but those are the strategies I want you to have. I just don't think there's any argument about why it should be a secret. Why should we be the people in the room that will dob you on the head and say, now you've got it? If you're going to believe that kids should be self-motivated, should be into self-regulation and should be in all this lovely language we like to use. If you're going to self-monitor, if you're going to self-assess, if you're going to self-talk, if you're going to worry about the whole self-evaluation, you better have a target to do that to. Now, one of the things we discovered, and we mainly worked in years 7, 8 in this area, is that a lot of kids, they have goals, they have success criteria, but the majority of those success criteria is performance-related. Doing it on time, doing it neatly, and making it expand to the length it's supposed to be. And we stupidly, in retrospect, went into those schools and said, well, how do we get them to have more mastery learning? And we did success criteria on these. It didn't work. It worked finally when we taught the teachers how to show kids what mastery looked like in success criteria. And yes, many kids parroted what the teachers were saying, but we don't see that as a problem at all. Of course, we want more than that. And so, no, I don't think there's any excuse for doing it at the end. I don't think that we should be saying to kids in every lesson, just trust me, wait and I'll tell you, and you might get there or you might not. The thing that drives me most in my work in schools is finding ways to keep kids in schools as long as possible. Like as a father of those 4 boys, Hank Levin's work impressed me. He showed that the best predictor in adult life of health, wealth and happiness was not achievement at school. It was the number of years in schooling. So I am absolutely obsessed with ways in which we can make schools inviting places for kids to be. And most kids make the decision about to stay in school around the ages of 11, 12. And so how do we make learning? You sure as hang don't make learning inviting by saying, wait, I'll tell you when you get there, do more. Oh, now I'll give you a test, now I'll see if you've got there. For some kids, they love it. And they'll go on to be our doctors and our lawyers. They love that kind of game. But for many kids who are going to be on our entrepreneurs, who are going to be our most successful people in our community, they want to have more control of their learning. If I was working with you in a school, I'd want to hear up front what, in this particular year group you're dealing with, what success would look like to start with. So you've got this group of kids. Now, what I want to listen to is I want you to have a deep knowledge of where every student is at the beginning. If you just told me generally and said this is the curriculum, I'd be worried. I'd want to know where each kid starts, because one of our killers is that we group kids in our system, and you do it here in Ontario by years. Now, I know that what year 2 means is that in year 2 there are at least 2 years growth gap. I know year 5 means there are 5 years growth gap in year 5. Year 10 there are 10 years growth gap. That's what it means to me. So there's no such thing as a year 2 or a year 5 curriculum. So if you started there, I would be worried. So I want to hear what success would look like. And I obviously want you to worry about every kid, where they start, what success would look like. I want to be up front. And the tool we created in New Zealand allows teachers to be up front, allows principals to be up front, to understand what you think success for every kid looks like. So I can come into you after a month and say, look, Pauline, this is what the year 3 teacher has said. This is what the year 5 teacher has said. This is what you, the year 6 teacher, do you realise your expectations are lower than the year 3? I want to get in front of that, because I know that what your expectations are in terms of what you think success is amongst the most powerful things. So I'd start there. What does success look like? I'd want you to show me the nature of the evidence of the growth of the kids through the year. And again, if you showed me a test, you'd have failed. If you don't show me a test, you would have failed. I want to see it across a variety of ways of evidence about the growth that they're making relative to the standards you're aiming for. Obviously, I'd want to include in that some kind of growth measures, the growth effect size stuff that we've been using. That's part of the equation, not the only part, but that's part of it. I think any time the answer is 1 in education, we've got the wrong answer. It's a variety of ways. And I'd want you to do that with your other teachers. I'd like you, in the professional development that we have, is I want you to be prepared to be contested about whether good enough is good enough. By you saying, this is evidence of the kind of change that I've achieved, this is where the kids were starting, this is where they're ending, and I'd like you to be open about that with your other teachers to say, is that good enough? So that you can start to say, have I got a common conception of progress? Am I getting the kind of progress I need? That's certainly the kind of things I'd be wanting to do in a school.
Okay, that video went for a little while, but I thought it was really, really relevant in terms of what we're talking about here. I think particularly at the beginning, he was focused more on what I was planning for us to unpack in this session this afternoon. And what he spoke about towards the end of that video clip was more whole school systemic at a much larger level. But at the end of the day, I think I would agree with his argument about us being upfront right from the beginning within a particular unit, within a particular lesson is super, super important, and that it gives us a target and it enables us to look for growth and so forth to check what sort of impact we're actually having and to give more control to students to self-regulate themselves and have more control in their learning. Thought that was really, really important. So that's why that's all visible learning, and obviously that ties in strongly with the ET framework. And John Fleming is super, super fond of that and believes that that was what we should be doing in our approach. What you're seeing on your screen now is from Hattie's visible learning in terms of some examples. This is just a table, like an appendice in his book that outlines the intention. I think this is for science, and these solos are essentially breaking it down into like a cognitive difficulty. So in many ways, very similar to what we've spoken in the past about with proficiency scales. So you can see like the lower cognitions of recognize, know, understand, and obviously um, the more difficult cognitions of actually being able to apply those skills. So learning intention here, recognize that light, sound are forms of energy and have properties. While success criteria in this circumstance, I can name one or more properties of light and sound. Um, and at a more complex level, something like this, recognize that the law of reflection is true for all plane surfaces and can predict what will happen in the surfaces rough. So this is something that I can see teachers doing, which is fantastic. Now, a reason I've scanned this and put this in is because I think if we're doing that, we are doing an awesome, awesome job. If we're doing that if we're giving that kind of clarity at the beginning of every lesson to our students, and of course, learning is not linear. Learning happens over a period of time, and some of these intentions would be the same, no doubt, for many, many lessons, or some of them might be just be for one lesson. It depends on the topic and the subject. But if we're doing this on a regular basis, we're doing an excellent job. Now, the big distinction I wanted to focus more on today was about in terms of this is what John Hattie is saying. Obviously, John Hattie being, you know, super well known in the educational research world and chair of AITSL and so forth. But in terms of what we're pushing or where we want to head to, we obviously want to all be using intentions and criteria in our lessons. We want to be able to have all of our intentions starting with cognitive verbs, whether it's recognize, calculate, recall, compare, contrast, etc. And we want them to be backward mapped from our curriculum and from our assessment tasks. And as Hattie said in that video before, it creates teachers who are forced to focus on what's most important, which John Fleming constantly reinforces about critical information, critical content. Um, but in terms of the distinction between where we would head after this, even if we are doing this on a regular basis, is making our success criteria a little bit more specific. For example, some learning intentions are going to be a bit larger and they might have many numerous elements that make them successful, that would make that an A standard. It could be a more complicated mathematical problem. It could be a student writing an extended paragraph. Um, the elements that make success are diverse, and there could be a variety of cognitions on different levels of difficulty that would be required to make that intention, that task, successful. And that's the distinction between Hattie and Fleming. John Fleming has said that to me on a few occasions now, where his approach is that yes, clear learning intentions in the same way that these are written, but the success criteria should be more tactile in terms of more concrete in terms of the actual steps that students have to um, do to master to achieve that standard at a quality level. So that would be one distinction. In the past, we've spoken about proficiency scales, and these are some examples, one from maths and one from English, for example. And the intention of these are really about um, having a clear goal, a clear intention at the top, and then breaking down the different criteria or the different skills that are needed to make that intention come about. Again, this example here from a maths one that was made sometime last year. In terms of the goal, we've got the ACARA standards here, identify corresponding alternate co-interior angles, etc. And then what's the vocab and what are the types of skills that are needed to make that happen. Now, that's a process that would be great to continue, and we would want to continue. Um, but making these evident in all of our lessons in terms of this is the larger goal that we're focusing on, and these are the smaller skills, or these are the elements that make that successful, or these are the characteristics or steps, the steps that need to be followed to make that happen. In terms of that happening in class, the goal was working together individually to improve our fourth paragraph and our persuasive essay. Well, what types of things do I need to be able to do? I can classify, organize points of arguments based on themes, topics, and so forth. I'll need to actually recall the persuasive structure and what are the elements within that. Now, again, going back to that distinction between John Hattie and John Fleming would be saying that we want to make sure that we've actually got the steps and clear characteristics to achieve that goal. If the goal is to write the introductory paragraph of an analytical exposition, what are the things I need to actually do? Can I count them on my hand, so to speak, as a Year 7 boy? Can I outline them on my hand? Uh, the steps, but not just the steps, the characteristics, they might be the language features that are needed. So obviously, if I was writing a paragraph here, a student would want to know the structural elements. They will need a point sentence. They would need evidence. They need to explain that evidence. We want to make sure they have some sort of refutation, rebuttal. What qualities, what characteristics make this a successful paragraph? Well, it's going to have certain persuasive appeals and techniques. It's going to have inclusive language, emotive language. It's going to have different techniques, rhetorical questions. It's going to have high modal frequency throughout. And we'd want to make sure that it's really fluent. So having a goal, having a clear intention, but actually having students understand what the steps are, what the characteristics are to do that well is more important. And I think that's what Hattie spoke about before. Learning intentions are important, but learning intentions are pointless if students don't have the criteria to make that target achievable. Having criteria, success criteria without an intention, as he said, is not as bad, but still not very good because it doesn't give us something to target our efforts towards. So that's what I wanted to really focus on today. How do we move from, if we are still early in the journey in terms of I'm new to explicit teaching or I'm not embedding learning intentions or success criteria on a regular basis in classes, where do I start? Because we're all at different journeys. In terms of starting, well, perhaps at this point we are more talking about what Hattie had here in his visible learning framework, which is really starting with an intention that's quite flexible, and they're flexible and broad because students are at different stages within the learning continuum, as he spoke about, and then talking about what the student can do. If we're at that level and that's where we're at, then that's perfectly fine. Taking it further though into the future, I do want teachers where the learning intention is particularly more complex or there's more depth to it, i.e., it's not an intention that's going to be achieved over a really short space of time. I would expect that we're breaking the success criteria down into a range of steps or a range of characteristics for students to follow. And that's certainly the pathway we're heading with John Fleming. So I brought in the John Hattie research to give us, I guess, the foreground in terms of what the research is saying in terms of how important it is and why it needs to happen, in our classrooms and across Australia and other schools. In terms of, though, taking it further, and that's exactly what John Fleming's done with his explicit teaching framework. He's taken Hattie's research, he's taken everything you've seen here, and he's deliberately embedded it after the consolidation warm up. But taking it further, making it more clear than just saying, I can predict what will happen if light is reflected off rough surfaces. Well, what elements would help you make that prediction? What would you be looking at? Would you be using some sort of table, some sort of formula to assist you making a prediction? What sort of language would you be making within that prediction? Would you be making a prediction in one sentence, or would you be making a prediction in a more of a concise paragraph? Would the prediction have to include some sort of reference to actual specific sources or numbers or statistics? I'm no maths teacher or science teacher, but what I'm getting at is, at the end of the day, a learning intention that has really precise success criteria is going to be better than, if it's applicable, that is going to be better than a learning intention with success criteria that is really in some ways almost like a rewording of the learning intention, but in a more student practical way. So moving towards actually outlining the specific steps is where we're heading. If we're not at that stage yet, as I said before, we're all at different stages on the journey. If we are putting in an intention and outlining a criteria the way that John Hattie has done it, that is perfectly fine. Where we're heading in the future, though, as we continue our journey in ET, is making sure that we can get as much clarity across to the students as possible. So that's in essence what I wanted to talk about. Hopefully, I haven't rambled too much. I feel like I have actually, because I really wanted the focus for this session to be to give you greater flexibility on the professional development process, but obviously applying this. So future actions, where are we headed after this? Well, we want to be creating these. If there are gaps in our teaching, in our unit plans, within the resources that we have, where we don't have intentions, obviously we're going to start small. That's where we want to start. We want to start making intentions and success criteria. If we've got a larger goal, those things can be put into the proficiency scales as I had up on the screen just earlier. Because if it's a goal that we're working towards over a 2-3 week period, whether that's writing an introductory paragraph of analytical essay or this particular topic in maths on geometry, if it's the same sort of main goal that we're working towards, then in many circumstances it can be better to have that in that one document. And certainly from my point of view, I want others to observe each other in seeing how we're using learning intentions and success criteria in our lessons, and helping each other in terms of what actually good practice looks like. And I'm particularly interested in coming into some classes over the next few weeks and looking at more so that transition from your consolidation warm up to outlining an intention or intentions and a criteria, or as I showed before, multiple elements of criteria that make up an intention, and then transitioning into our gradual release model. So, could you please review some of the documents that I've given you, and could you please spend the remainder of this session this afternoon reviewing what you have, working with other colleagues in terms of within subject areas for 7 English, 8 maths, etc. What intentions do we have? Do we have them embedded at the end of warm-up PowerPoints? Do we have them listed at the top of handouts or other worksheets and so forth? Yeah, and obviously see me if you've got any questions. Thank you.